Good morning, my friends. It's good to come back to study, as we do every day, studying the daily Rambam. Today's portion of the Rambam, we're going to be learning the negative commandments. We're going to be continuing from yesterday. So we're continuing to learn from mitzvah number 123 all the way through mitzvah 244. So we have some 120 mitzvahs that we're going to be learning all these negative commandments that God tells us, things that we have to withhold ourselves from doing them. So here goes. Join along. Mitzvah number 123 is not to remove the meat of the Pesach, the Passover sacrifice, from the company, from the group of people in which it was eaten. As it says, do not remove any of the meat from the house where it is eaten. Mitzvah 124 is not to allow any remainings of the portions of the meal offering. There was a certain type of sacrifice to be, not to let any of it to become leaven. Next mitzvah is not to eat the Passover sacrifice when it is raw or cooked, and it has to specifically be broiled. So you gotta barbecue it. Next mitzvah is 126, is not to give the Passover sacrifice to anyone who is an alien resident in the land of Israel. Next mitzvah is not to give it to someone who is uncircumcised. Next mitzvah is you're not allowed to give it to someone who is an apostate, even though he might be Jewish. And also, then now comes a general mitzvah in regards to eating sacrifice meat, that a person who is impure is not allowed to eat it from any sacrifice, because it's holy meat, and if someone is impure, so then they're not allowed to eat from it. And then the next mitzvah is that one is not allowed to actually eat one is not allowed to eat from a sacrifice that the sacrifice became impure. So the first one is that if the person is impure. Here it is a mitzvah, if the sacrifice, the meat itself became impure, then one is not allowed to eat from it. Mitzvah 131 is that a person is, if the meat of the sacrifice, the deadline of it has passed, so then a person is not allowed to eat the meat after its deadline of when it's allowed to be eaten up until. If you have a sacrifice which has a case where it's called pigul, which basically means that the person who was bringing the sacrifice, the Kohen, was having not the right thoughts. He was mistaking his thoughts and his mind, which were very important when bringing a sacrifice. And he mistakenly thought the wrong information, it becomes pigul, and ultimately we're not allowed to eat from it. The next mitzvah is for an unauthorized person is not allowed to eat from the teruma, from the tithe that the Kohen receives. So if someone is not a Kohen, he's not allowed to eat from it. Even if the Kohen only has like a tenant or a worker that's working for him temporarily, that person is not allowed to eat from it unless it's really like a servant and he lives with him and everything, so then he's allowed to eat from it. An uncircumcised person is also not allowed to eat from the teruma, and if a Kohen is impure, he's not allowed to eat from the teruma. And if the Kohen has a daughter who is a chalala. So in other words, a chalala is someone who, if the Kohen married a woman who he's not allowed to marry, as we're going to learn in just a moment, who he's allowed and who he's not allowed to marry. And he has a daughter from that marriage, so she is called a chalala. She does not have a status of the daughter of a Kohen, because the Kohen married someone he was not allowed to marry. So she is not allowed to eat from the teruma as well, from the tithe. Next mitzvah 138 is when a meal sacrifice is brought as a sacrifice, it is not to be eaten. It's only supposed to go onto the altar, and that's that. And then certain sin offerings which are brought in the temple are also not supposed to be eaten. 140 is that we're not allowed to eat in any sacrifice who have been disqualified and haven't made a blemish within them purposely. So we're not allowed to eat that because a person has blemished them and inflicted the animal purposely, so therefore now we're not allowed to eat from it. Mitzvah 141 is that if we have the second tithe, which we spoke, that a person has to take a second tithe from his produce, and he has to eat it now in Jerusalem, so he has to eat it within Jerusalem. He's not allowed to eat it outside of Jerusalem. So to also in regards to wine that has had the second tithe, it also has to be eaten within Jerusalem, and it's not allowed to be eaten outside. And so to also in regards to oil, which comes from olives, the same idea. Mitzvah 144 is not to eat an unblemished firstling animal. So if you have an animal which is a firstling, it was a firstborn. So then again, as we said, that also has to be eaten within Jerusalem. We're not allowed to eat it outside of Jerusalem. The next mitzvah, 145, so we're discussing all different places where sacrifices and where holy foods are supposed to be eaten. The next mitzvah is in regards to the Kohanim, in regards to the priests, where they are supposed to be eating their part of the sacrifices. There were certain parts of the meat that they were supposed to eat, depending on the sacrifice, but they were not allowed to eat it outside of the temple. If you have a burnt offering, which is the offering that the entire animal went onto the altar and was burnt entirely, so one is not allowed to eat from it. 147 is that even the sacrifices that one is allowed to eat from, the priests or the owners were able to eat a little bit of it, we're not allowed to eat it before the blood was sprinkled onto the altar. That was a very important part of the sacrifice. Someone who is an unauthorized person is not allowed to eat from that meat. All right. 149 is that a Kohen is not allowed to eat from the Bikurim, which is the first fruits which were brought by everyone as a gift to God. So a Kohen is not allowed to eat from them before they were placed in the temple and brought as a gift, and only then is he allowed to take it to enjoy it as on God's part, so to speak. God gives him the opportunity to be able to enjoy them on God's behalf. Mitzvah 150 is not to eat any tithe that has become impure. So to also a person who is in a state of mourning, he's not allowed to eat the second tithe, even though he's in Jerusalem. But if he's in a state of mourning, he's not allowed to eat from it. Okay, moving along. Mitzvah 152. If a person has the second tithe, it's called Maaser Sheni. Sheni as in the second. So if he has this Maaser Sheni and now he is not able to eat it for whatever reason, and so now the fruits are going to get destroyed. They're going to get ruined, and with time, because he's not able to travel to Jerusalem right now. So he wants to redeem the worth of this food onto something else. So he's not allowed to use the proceeds of this. So now he's able to take it. He's able to take this food and put it onto money, so to speak. So now he's able to have this money, which now becomes holy. And ultimately, when it comes to Jerusalem, he'll be able to buy food with it, and the holiness of the first fruit will fall into the second foods. But when he goes and rebuys food with this money, he's only able to buy food and drink with it, something which is consumed. He's not allowed to get anything else. He can't go and buy himself a motorcycle in Jerusalem with it. Not to eat foods that are called tevel, which mean that they have not been set, they've not had teruma, the tithe, and the maasar, so on, the gifts that a person has to give. He hasn't done them yet. It's called tevel. It's not ready yet. He's not allowed to eat from it. So the Rambam now tells us the order of how exactly a person is supposed to give the various gifts, and there's a specific order. So we're not allowed to take teruma before we take the first fruits as a gift. We're not allowed to take the first tithe of teruma. So first we have to do the first tithe, then we have to do the second tithe. And basically the Torah tells us very clearly how it works. First is the gift of the first fruits, then comes the tithe, then comes the teruma, which is the gift to the Kohen, then comes the tithe to the Levi, then comes the second tithe, which the owner eats in Jerusalem. So everything has to be in that order. 155 is that if a person took upon himself a certain vow of an offering or a sacrifice, he has to do that. He's not allowed to wait. He's not allowed to push it off too much. If a person goes to the temple for the holidays, as we spoke, 3 times a year, there was a holiday that a person would go to Jerusalem. He's not allowed to come empty-handed. He has to bring a sacrifice or a gift for God. A person is not allowed to violate a vow which he took upon himself. Now we're talking about the woman that a Kohen is not allowed to marry. So a Kohen is not allowed to marry an immoral person, a prostitute. A Kohen is not allowed to marry a chalala, as we explained before what a chalala is. A Kohen is not allowed to marry a divorcee. A Kohen is not allowed a regular Kohen is allowed to marry a widow, but a Kohen Gadol, the high priest, is not allowed to marry a widow. And a high priest is not allowed to come into any sexual relations with a widow, even if it's outside of, however it might end up being outside the context of marriage. He's not allowed to do that. So there is a double law of a Kohen Gadol, the high priest, of not marrying a widow. A Kohen is not allowed, a priest is not allowed to enter the temple with hair that has grown very long. In other words, he has to keep his hair in place. Short. Mitzvah 164, that a Kohen is not allowed to go into the temple with torn garments, as it says in the verse. 165, that a Kohen is not supposed to go out of the temple in the middle of his service. If he's in the middle of his hours of work, the time that he's supposed to be in the temple, he should not go out. Now, more laws in regards to a Kohen, to a priest. Mitzvah 166 is for a regular Kohen that he should not become impure just for anyone that passes away, and going and dealing with a dead body will make him impure. So he's not allowed to do that. The Kohen Gadol, the high priest, is not allowed to get impure, even for his close relatives. For a high priest is also not allowed to go into a place where there is a dead body found, because that's going to in turn make him impure. So he has to be very careful with that. All right, some laws in regards to the Levites. The Levites, the tribe of Levi, did not take a portion in the land of Israel. So they don't take a portion in the land. They don't take a portion in the spoils of the various conquests and wars that took place. And we're going to learn soon a little bit more about the Levites. But here we move on to another topic. We're not allowed to tear out our hair during mourning. We used to be accustomed, when people were in mourning, after someone passed away, they would rip out all their hair. We're not allowed to do that. We're not allowed to eat non-kosher animals. We're not allowed to eat non-kosher fish. We're not allowed to eat non-kosher birds. We're not allowed to eat flying insects. We're not allowed to eat crawling insects. We're not allowed to eat worms. We're not allowed to eat of the various creatures of the ocean. So there are kosher fish, but there are various insects and various sea creatures we're not allowed to eat from them. We're not allowed to eat a dead animal. We're not allowed to eat a dying animal. We're not allowed to eat a limb from an animal while it is alive. We're not allowed to eat the gid hanashe, which is a certain nerve within the animal's body. We're not allowed to eat that specific nerve. We're not allowed to eat blood. We're not allowed to eat certain fats. We're not allowed to eat milk and meat together. This is the source for the mitzvah of kosher. We're not allowed to partake in the meat, and we're not allowed to eat any of the meat of an animal, of an ox, which had been stoned, because there were certain laws regarding animals, that if an animal kills a person so that animal dies, you're not allowed to enjoy its meat. Alright, mitzvah 189, moving on to a totally different topic, is that there was every year on the holiday, up until the second day of the holiday, when they would bring the special Omer sacrifice. So you're not allowed to eat the new produce of that year till that sacrifice was brought. So even though you have wheat that grew in the month prior to then, you're not allowed to eat that wheat yet. You have to wait till the second day of Passover, when the sacrifice is brought, and only then are you allowed to eat from that new produce. We're not allowed to eat roasted grain from the newly produce before Passover. We're not allowed to eat fresh grain from the newly grown produce before Passover. We're not allowed, some more laws in regards to what we are and not allowed to eat, is that if a person plants a tree and it starts, bearing fruit after a year, 2, 3, up until the third year, we're not allowed to enjoy its fruit. It's called orla. The next mitzvah is that if a person has, we're not allowed to mix species when we're planting. So here is a law that we're not allowed to mix species in a vineyard. The next mitzvah is that we're not allowed to use wine. We've spoken about a vineyard. We're not allowed to use wine that was used for idol worship. We're not allowed to eat or drink like a drunkard and just enjoy and be totally not to be too involved in our food. It's a mitzvah. We're not allowed to eat on a fast day. We're not allowed to eat leavened food on Passover. We're not allowed to eat any type of chametz, of leavened products, even a mixture of it on Passover. We're not allowed to eat on the 14th day of Nisan, on the day before Passover, the day of, after midday, so that when we come to the Seder, we come to the night of the holiday to eat the Passover sacrifice and the matzah and the bitter herbs, we should have an empty stomach and be ready for it. Talking about Passover, we move on to mitzvah 200, that we are not to have any chametz seen in a person's possession during the holiday. And we're not allowed, not only not to have it seen, but it's just not allowed to be found in general within our house. Mitzvah 202 is for a Nazirite not to drink any wine or anything to do with wine or grapes. Even if he's talking about not to eat fresh grapes, he's not allowed to do that as well. And also raisins he's not allowed to eat. And even the grape seeds he's not allowed to eat. And even the grape peel he's not allowed to eat. That's pretty sharp. So nothing to do with grapes if you're a Nazirite. It doesn't really apply these days. We don't really have Nazirites. Mitzvah 207 is that a Nazirite is not allowed to get impure from a dead body. He has to stay holy. He should not go into a place where there is any dead body. He should not cut his hair. Alright. Moving on to the next mitzvah 210 is that when a person harvests his field, he's not allowed to harvest the entire field, as we spoke about. When he is gathering the stalks that fall during the harvest, he should not, and the stalk falls when he's making his bundle, leave that stalk that fell. It's okay. Leave it for the poor people. These are all verses of the Torah that the Rambam is bringing sources for, telling us exactly where the mitzvah comes from. So to also undeveloped grape clusters, one should not be picking them and leave them for the poor. Also, if you gather the grapes and certain grapes fall into the ground, you're also not allowed to take those. You leave it for the poor. If you forgot a sheaf in your field, you fill up your wagon and you take everything and you forgot one or two behind in the field, leave them there. Talking about fields, we're not allowed to sow mixed species together and in seeds into the ground. You're not allowed to grow and sow grain or vegetables in a vineyard, because then it's going to come out another type of creation, and that we're not allowed to do because we're not allowed to mix species. We're not allowed to crossbreed animals as well. This is all these laws are, by the way, applicable to Jewish people. If a non-Jew does all of this, we are allowed to enjoy from it. You're not allowed to work with two animals like a donkey and an ox together to plow the field. You're not allowed to cultivate the land during the 7th year, the year of the Shemitah, the sabbatical year. You're not allowed to work a tree as well, same idea. And also we're not allowed to reap the crops that grow on their own during the 7th year. The land has been working and there's some leftovers, and now there's some little stuff that are growing. We're not allowed to take those officially. Again, we leave it all for the poor people. It's a very interesting mitzvah, the way that the Torah looks at poor people and people that do have field and so on. They're working hard. So we're saying in the little stuff which you're not going to feel that it's in many details. You should always look out for the poor people. It's an amazing mitzvah. Mitzvah 223. We're nearing the end of today's lesson. Mitzvah 223 is that we're not allowed to reap the fruit that grows on the trees. Same way as you're not allowed to reap them during the Shemitah, during the 7th year that grow from the land. Also in the Jubilee year, we're not allowed to do that. Also, the crops that grow on their own during the Jubilee year, we're not allowed to do that. Also, the same thing in regards to the trees that grow fruit during the Jubilee year. All right, talking about the Jubilee year, so now we're talking about how sale of land works in the land of Israel. That is, sale of a land is not allowed to be sold forever, permanently. It's only up until the Jubilee year. In regards to the Levites, continuing a little bit with them, we should not, there are certain parts of the cities of the Levites where they lived that they had fields in the surrounding areas around them. We have to leave them as fields, and we're not allowed to change them into becoming residential areas, because this is their livelihood. Not to forsake the Levites, because they have no official place in the land of Israel where they live. So we have to make sure that they always have their cities, and also to always give them gifts before every holiday, so on and so forth. Mitzvah 230 is if a person had a loan. So it says that in the 7th year in the Shemitah, all loans are nullified. So a person is not allowed to go and demand the payment for a loan if the 7th year has passed. In other words, not the 7th year from the loan, but the 7th year in the cycle of the Shemitah of the sabbatical year. But here comes the next mitzvah, that if a person is asking from you a loan and it's just before the 7th year, don't say, I'm going to withhold myself. I'm not going to give you a loan because I know that I might lose it, because you might not pay me back in time and then I'm going to lose the loan. So we have to be careful. We should do that. And by the way, the rabbis made a decree that there is a certain loophole, so to speak, in the law, that if a person gives over his loans to the Beth Din, that it's under their jurisdiction, so then it doesn't become nullified during the 7th year. It's actually something which we do till today, interestingly enough. Mitzvah 232 is in general that we have to always give poor people, to always give tzedakah, give them whatever they need. If a person has a servant a Hebrew servant, when he goes free, he's not allowed to send him empty-handed. He always has to give him gifts. If a person gave someone a loan, poor person, he's giving him a loan, and now he knows that this person who he gave the loan to doesn't have the means, he's not able to pay him back, he just doesn't have the money. He's not allowed to go and ask him for the loan back, just in order to, remind him and, step over him, so to speak. You have to be very careful for his feelings. We're not allowed to lend a loan with interest to a Jew. We're not allowed to accept a loan with interest. We're not allowed to be an intermediate between two people that are lending and borrowing with interest. If a person has a worker, he's not allowed to delay his payment for his worker. He's not allowed to take a security from a debtor. So if he lends someone money, now he wants to take a security, he's not allowed to take it by force. It has to be in a very peaceful form. Now, but even if you do take a security, let's say the guy takes him his pillow. That's all he has. He's a simple guy, poor guy. And he takes his pillow. He has to give it to him at night when he goes to sleep. He has to give it to him whenever he needs that security. He's not allowed to take a security from a widow. Mitzvah 242, third to the end, is that we are not allowed to take utensils used in preparation of food as a security. We're not allowed to kidnap anyone. As it says in the Ten Commandments, do not steal. This is referring to kidnapping. Mitzvah 244 for today, the last mitzvah, is not to steal in regards to money. We're not allowed to steal. All right, my friends, with this we complete the already 244 first mitzvot. Tomorrow we were going to learn all the way till the end, 365. And with that we will complete the entire 613 mitzvot that we've been learning over the last couple days. This is amazing. And we're going to get very soon to the Rambam itself. All the best. Have a very good day.